These are the unwritten stories of the Melpomene projects, Uptown, Third Ward, Central City.
Street famous.
The Melpomene projects, officially called the Gustavo Apartments or the Gus Homes, is a housing complex located in the Central City neighborhood of New Orleans. The Melf, constructed in 1964, occupies 10 city blocks bounded by South Robinson, Clio, Simon Boulevard, and Martin Luther King. There will be 4 3-story buildings and 2 4-story buildings for families and a high-rise for the elderly. Being 12 stories tall, the Gus High-Rise is the tallest public housing complex in the city. The Melf, once made up of single multi-family homes, by the 1950s, the city declared the Melf as the slums, which paved the way for the build of the projects. The Melf will be the youngest surviving housing projects in New Orleans. The high-rise will undergo major renovations in 2002. In the 1980s and the 1990s, the Melf was well known for that work, as it was once run over by steppers and hustlers. In 2004, 3 of 6 low-rise buildings will be demolished after failing to meet the Housing Authority of New Orleans economic guidelines. In 2006, the Melf will be one of the only projects in the city that survived Hurricane Katrina with minimal wind damage and no flooding. The last building will be demolished in 2013. Reconstruction will begin in the same year at a cost of $61 million through the use of $26 million from HANO, $21.3 million from FEMA, and $13.1 million in low-income housing credits. Gibbs Construction and Clomax Construction will complete the development of the new 1, 2, 3, and 4-bedroom unit, which include Energy Star appliances, which would also be pre-wired for cable and internet services. The new Gus Homes would open in 2018 with 638 homes located on the entire Gus site, 577 of which are public housing units. The story starts in the Melf, former home to matriarch Miss Meliza, mother of Brenda and Michelle Keelan, a.k.a. Missy, off the MLK side of the Melf. Passion Cobbins will grow up in the Melf with the men who she would take the stand on in 2017. Coined as the First Lady, Passion will spill on the men who we now know today as YMM. Passion will go on to testify that the men moved work and crushed their ops. Claiming to have witnessed one crushing and having extensive knowledge of 4 more, Passions will go on to testify that YMM would brag about spending the bin. Passion, who dropped out in 11th grade, did hair in the project and would be on the set with YMM. 25 at the time of the trial, Passion will give full details on the crushing of Deshaun Hartford. Passion would allege that Lionel Allen, a.k.a. Lot, will pull out 2 blicks, push her to the ground, and smash Deshaun Hartford. Passion, who was arrested herself on unrelated aggravated assault charges in July of 2014, wouldn't be done. She will go on to testify that in 2012 would delete Benny Smith, aka Funk. YMM would believe that Funk was playing both sides of the field with the one tenors. Passion would state that during the reign of YMM, she and her former boyfriend, Jacoby Boyd, aka Co of YMM, who was sentenced to 40 years for crushing Travis Thomas on I-10, were like Bonnie and Clyde. The Rick, Jawan, Brian, and Delwyn would all be convicted following a 7-day trial. Lionel Allen, a.k.a. Lot, would be tagged with the leader role of YMM. YMM was allegedly formed in or about 2005 and will continue to exist through 2014. It was rumored that YMM controlled the Central City territory up and down Martin Luther King by the Melf. YMM would allegedly participate in a wide-range conspiracy to pump that hard in Central City. A long-standing feud between the one-tenors and YMM would be in place. Coming up in the Melf, members of the Allen family and YMM would have blood and street ties. 3 members of the one-tenors will be convicted on January 29th of 2015 in Orleans Parish Criminal Court for the Breonna Allen occurrence.
Absolutely, Camille, and as you can understand, this is a moment the families of Breonna Allen and Shawana Pierce have been waiting for since that May 29th, 2012, when the suspects were accused of opening fire with an AK-47. Well, now the jury has spoken. All three convicted on charges. Now, this is a trial that has stretched on for just about 3 weeks now. The prosecutors allege that not only did the convicted people in this case open fire, Allen and Shawana Pierce, the prosecutors also say that they were involved in an uptown gang that funneled and weapons throughout the city. That's why they also faced a racketeering charge. They were found guilty on that as well. Guilty on all counts in the indictment except for one of the lesser charges. Now, this was an emotional time for the family in the courtroom. You could see tears streaming down the faces. You can see people hunched over sobbing, wondering if this is a day that would ever come. One of the suspects, Sam Newman, actually jumped up and started to shout out while the verdict was being read. He wanted to be taken out of the courtroom. The court was then resumed to order as they continued to read the verdict. Certainly, we're waiting on family and attorneys to come out of the courtroom. We'll bring you details as we get them. But for now, we're on your side at criminal court. I'm Gina Swanson. Back to you.
Lott will be found guilty of conspiracy to possess tools during and in relation to other related crimes, pushing that work, assault with a weapon, and deleting 3 of his ops. It will be the testimony of passion that will seal Lott's fate for allegedly participating in the smashing of Benny Smith on April 22, 2012, the crushing of Deshaun Harford on June 3, 2012, and for being an aider and abettor in the deletion of Travis Thomas that occurred in May of 2013. Lionel Allen, aka Lott, will be one of 11 men originally charged in August of 2014 in a superseding indictment involving weapons and pumping that work. 5 members of YMM will plead guilty to the conspiracy charges and will be sentenced. Jacoby Cole Boyd was sentenced to 480 months of incarceration. Alfred L. Cobbins was sentenced to 252 months of incarceration. Sean Gunnar Grayson was sentenced to 207 months of incarceration. Reuben Root Geiger was sentenced to 220 months of incarceration. Darius D-Man Williams was sentenced to 156 months of incarceration. And DeAndre Soldier Hills was sentenced to 96 months of incarceration. In August of 2015, federal RICO charges for crushing the ops will be added against the remaining alleged members of YMM in a second superseding indictment. Wilson will plead guilty and was sentenced to 180 months of incarceration. Keelan will be sentenced to life plus 10 years after being convicted of multiple counts of deleting his ops. Will be sentenced to life in prison for his participation in the RICO. Delwood will be sentenced to 16 years of incarceration for his participation in the same conspiracy. Brian Scott will receive 20 years in prison for his role in the conspiracy. On Wednesday, December the 13th, Lionel Allen, aka Lott, will become the last of a group of 5 YMM members to be sentenced following being convicted. In June, Lott's co-defendants, Roy, Pooh Stupid, and Brian Scott, had been sentenced earlier that fall. Lott was convicted of 21 of the 24 counts against him. He would receive the harshest punishment of the 5 men. Lionel Allen, aka Lott's convictions were racketeering, 3 counts of crushing his ops in the aid of racketeering. The victims would be Deshaun Harford, Benny Smith, and Travis Thomas. 6 counts of assault with a weapon in the aid of racketeering, 8 counts of discharging a weapon in relation to a crime, moving that work, and conspiracy to possess the blickies. Smith and Harford, who had been deleted in April and June of 2012, as well as Thomas, who had been crushed in May of 2013, would all be on Lott's charges. Lott would also be accused of spitting the bin 12 different times between October 2011 and May 2013. Acting U.S. Attorney Dwayne A. Evans would announce that Lionel Allen, aka Lott, will be sentenced after having previously been found guilty of violating the Racketeer Influence Corrupt Organizations Act, aka RICO. U.S. District Judge Kurt D. Engelhardt will sentence Lott to serve life in prison plus 420 months, which is 35 years, to run consecutive.
Street famous.
Lamondo Flair Allen, son of Pernell Thompson and Esther Allen, was born December 26 of 1978. Hailing from the Melf, the Allen family is one of the biggest families in Central City. On February the 8th of 2004, members of the NOPD will investigate the deletion of two men, ages 25 and 22 years of age. The 25-year-old man will be identified as Lamondo Allen. The other victim will be identified as 22-year-old Edward Taylor. The incident will take place shortly before 11 p.m. at 2339 Martin Luther King. Edward Taylor will be observed lying in the courtyard, suffering from being hit multiple times. Lamondo will be seen lying a short distance away from Edward on a concrete stairway near the second floor balcony. Lamondo had been hit in the chest. Both men will be pronounced deleted on the scene. Edward had a second-degree warrant out for his arrest in connection with the January 7, 2003 crushing of 26-year-old Aaron Jones, who was smashed in the 1500 block of Bienville. The NOPD had aired his photograph January 14, 2004 in connection with the case. Lamondo would also have previous arrests. In May of 2003, he was arrested on 2 counts of attempted crushing and 1 count of first-degree crushing. In December and October of 1999, he was arrested on 2 separate first-degree crushing cases. This is the story of Lamondo Flair Allen. On February the 8th, 2004, 2 men, Edward Chocolate Taylor and Lamondo Flair Allen, will be deleted. On May 27, 2004, Tadaro Tony will be indicted for 2 counts of second-degree crushings. Count 1 will pertain to the crushing of Lamondo Allen. Count 2 will pertain to the crushing of Edward Taylor. On June 2, 2004, Tadaro will plead not guilty at his arraignment. On June 15 of 2005, the trial court will deny Tadaro's motion to suppress evidence. On March 3rd of 2006, the trial court will grant Tadaro a motion for a speedy trial. June 26th, 27th, and 28th of 2006, Tadaro will be tried by a jury of 12. The jury will not be able to reach a verdict as to count 1. The trial court will declare a mistrial as to count 1. The jury will find Tadaro guilty as to count 2. At trial, 5 witnesses will testify on behalf of the state. New Orleans Police Department Detective Carlton Lawless, the lead detective on the case, Bruce Wu Moore, Pernell Thompson, and OPD officer Kenneth Leary, who was stipulated to be an expert in examination and identification of GATS and ballistic testing, Dr. Paul McCary, who was stipulated to be an expert in forensic pathology, would also testify. The sole defense witness will be Detective Lawless, who was recalled. On December 14th of 2006, the trial court will deny Tadaro's motion for post-verdict judgment of acquittal. Tadaro will waive all legal delays and be facing 40 years at hard labor. On April 12th of 2007, Tadaro will plead not guilty to a habitual offender bill of information filed by the state. On April 30th of 2008, Tadaro will be adjudicated as a second-time felony habitual offender. The trial court will vacate the original sentence and resentence Tadaro to 40 years at hard labor. On May 1st of 2008, the trial court will deny Tadaro's motion to reconsider sentence. Detective Lawless will testify that the double crushing occurred at about 10:30 p.m. on February 8th of 2004 at 2339 Martin Luther King Boulevard in New Orleans, Louisiana. When he arrived on the scene, Detective Lawless would find Chocolate's body at the bottom of a stairwell leading down to the courtyard. Flair's body would be on a stairwell leading to the second floor landing with his head and shoulders resting on the landing. The stairways and landings were on the outside of the building. The deletions would appear to have occurred in the courtyard or on the first floor. Flair would appear to have been hit up downstairs and climbed up the stairs to the second floor landing before collapsing. On the night of the crushings, Detective Lawless would interview Flair's pops, Pernell. It was during this interview that Pernell would come across as nonchalant. The story would go like this. Earlier that day, he would receive a call from Flair asking him for a ride from 2339 Martin Luther King. Pernell would say that Flair appeared to be nervous. Upon arriving to the location, Pernell would look for Flair, where he knew he hung out. When he would arrive on the second floor landing, he would observe Flair, who had been hit up on the ground. Pernell would immediately call the police, denying he knew who was responsible for hitting Flair up. On the night of the double crushing, Detective Lawless would also interview Chanel, who would state that someone had put a bag on Flair's head because of the turf wall that was active at the time. During this investigation, Detective Lawless would also interview Brandy Dwyer, who hung in the area where the double crushing occurred. Brandy would inform Detective Lawless that T. Darrow crushed Flair as a result of a bag being put on Flair's head. It was these interviews that would make Detective Lawless come to the conclusion that T. Darrow and Woo were suspects. Detective Lawless would obtain an arrest warrant for the two in a search for the apartment of Woo's girls, John Franklin, at 2401 Martin Luther King Boulevard, apartment 2B. No contraband will be found in John apartment. Several weapons and ammunition will be found stashed in an abandoned apartment next door at apartment 2A. NOPD would also recover 2 spent .45 cartridge casings on the scene. A .45 linked to the double crushings would later be recovered during an unrelated investigation. At Detective Lawless' request, the weapons will be tested for fingerprints. No prints will be found. During Detective Lawless' testimony, defense counsel will permit an audio recorded statement of Rachel Allen Hankton, in which she would state that Pernell admitted that it was he who pulled the trigger on Flair. It was alleged that Flair, who was suffering from being hit up, would tell his dad to finish him. Detective Lawless would testify that Pernell was arrested subsequently to the incident and charged with aggravated burglary and aggravated assault. These charges will be based on an occurrence in which Pernell would allegedly forcefully enter a house and threaten to delete his ex-wife, Esther Allen, Flair's mother, and her sister, Rachel. At one point during this investigation, Detective Lawless would also arrest Brandy for possession of that hard. The NOPD would also find several weapons and ammunition for a .357 with 6 spent cartridge casings next to it in the abandoned apartment. 2 cutters, one in a wrinkled and live 7.62 by 39mm cartridges for the choppers. Detective Lawless would interview Woo on 2 occasions. During the first interview, Woo would tell him that he was at his mother's home when Darrow came and got him, stating that he was strapped up with a 9 before leaving. Detective Lawless would also testify that during the first interview that Woo had provided him with enough information about the crushing to lead him to believe that he was on the scene. During the second interview, Woo would tell Detective Lawless that Flair called him on the phone. Cell phone records from Flair's phone would show an incoming call to him from Woo at 9:13 p.m. on the night of the deletions and an outgoing call about a minute or 2 before that to Woo. Woo would later testify that he turned himself in 10 days after the deletions. He would be originally charged with second-degree crushing, but would plead guilty to being an accessory after the fact, receiving a 5-year sentence in exchange for testifying on behalf of the state. On the stand, Woo would admit to being convicted, pleaded guilty to possession of that hard in 1998, aggravated assault in 1999, and manslaughter in 2003. Woo would also testify that he knew Flair and that he and Flair and Chocolate all hustled. Woo would go on to testify that T. Darrow was a hitman that took contracts to crush people. On the day of the double smashings, Woo, Flair, and T. Darrow would meet at John apartment. Flair, being street smart, was leery to the fact that T. Darrow wanted them to go with him to get another dude who had previously hit somebody up that he was kin to. Flair, at the same time, wanted to crush Chocolate himself. Woo would state that he kept telling Flair not to go with the move on Chocolate. In his version of the story, Woo would say that they all rode to the Melf in Pernell's truck. Him, Chocolate, and Flair would each be strapped with choppers, going on to say that T. Darrow was strapped with a .357 and Pernell would not be strapped at all. After picking up Chocolate, they would return to John apartment. Exiting the vehicle, they began walking up the stairs to the second floor. Waiting to get out of the way of what he knew was coming, Woo would walk up the stairs first, entering the apartment ahead of everyone else. After hearing the shots and T. Darrow running inside to say that Flair had been crushed, Woo would go outside to find Flair on the stairs. Immediately after, Woo would grab the chopper from underneath Flair and bring it inside. Woo would go on to say that he could not see Chocolate, but he could hear him hollering from down the stairs. It is alleged that Woo would tell T. Darrow to hit Chocolate in the head a few times to finish the job. T. Darrow would then allegedly take the collar that Flair was clutching, go downstairs, and dog Chocolate. Woo would also testify that he was on the stairs near Flair's feet where he could see T. Darrow allegedly smash Chocolate. Going on to further testify, Woo Woo would state that T. Darrow told him that he didn't hit Flair up. When questioned, Woo Woo would deny ever busting his chopper that night. In response to further questioning, Woo Woo would state that right after the incident, they would put the cutters in the abandoned apartment next to Jandrika's apartment. Woo Woo, acknowledging that he knew Brandy, would testify that he had no idea why she would put the charge on him for crushing Flair. After the extreme amount of pressure, Woo Woo would admit that he lied regarding several matters relating to the double deletions, also admitting that he had given 2 previous statements in which he never said he observed T. Darrow crush anyone, further denying that it was him that had done everything he claimed T. Darrow had done. Woo Woo would also deny conspiring with Pernell while they were locked up to place the blame on T. Darrow, stating that while they were both in jail, they only saw each other through a window. Also denying telling police that he learned the details of the crushings, including T. Darrow committing them while he was at the barbershop before Flair's funeral. On the stand, Pernell would acknowledge a plea bargain agreement that was signed by him. In that agreement, Pernell pleaded guilty to being an accessory after the fact. The agreement would provide that Pernell be released after T. Darrow's trial. The agreement would further provide that in exchange for his testimony, Pernell would not be prosecuted for any crime stemming from the aggravated burglary and aggravated assault charges from the incident involving his ex-wife and her sister. Due to his testimony, Pernell would also not be charged as an habitual offender. Pernell would ultimately end up admitting to pleading guilty in 1982 to illegally carrying a weapon and a possession charge with intent to distribute in 1990. Pernell would also acknowledge 2 more possession with intent to distribute charges, as well as being a convicted felon in possession of a firearm. Later on, going on to testify that he knew Woo Woo and Flair were very close, also admitting that he knew Flair was a hustler. Recounting the events of the day of the double deletion, Pernell would state that Flair contacted him earlier that day to ask him for a ride. Pernell would state that he arrived to find Flair standing on the corner of Martin Luther King Boulevard and South Liberty Street. They would then go to Jandrika's apartment, where they would find T. Darrow, Woo Woo, and Jandrika already inside. According to Pernell, Flair told him that someone wanted to crush him and he wanted to smash them first. Pernell would also testify that he and Woo Woo would attempt to talk Flair out of a crash dummy move. Going on to further testify, Pernell would say that the 3 of them, Flair, T. Darrow, would leave the apartment in his pickup truck to pick up Chocolate. Pernell and T. Darrow would ride in the front, while Flair and Woo Woo would ride in the bed of the truck. Flair and Woo Woo would both be strapped with choppers. T. Darrow was packing a .357. Woo Woo would also have a 9 wrapped in a towel. Upon returning to 2339 Martin Luther King and parking his truck, the 4 men would hop out and head up the stairs in the following order: Woo Woo, Chocolate, T. Darrow, and Flair. Pernell, who wasn't strapped, would stay by the passenger side of his truck. In describing the incident, Pernell would testify that when T. Darrow got to the top of the steps, he started letting off, hitting Chocolate up at close range with the .357. Pernell would estimate that Chocolate was about 2 steps above T. Darrow when he got hit up. When asked about Flair, Pernell would say that he saw Flair getting off with the chopper, going on to say that he did not see who hit Flair up, but he did witness him stumble back down the stairs, later testifying that he dipped around to the other stairway of the 2nd floor, where he would see Flair, who had been hit up, stumbling up the stairway. According to Pernell, he would then attempt to get Flair back down the steps and into his truck so that he could take him to the hospital, but was never able to do so. It was at this point Pernell would state that he would notice Flair no longer had his chopper. Initially, Pernell testified that he did not actually see Chocolate get hit, but he knew Chocolate had been hit in the back of his head, later stating that he saw T. Darrow busting at someone downstairs. He would make the assumption that T. Darrow was busting at Chocolate. Recanting the events of the incident, Pernell would say he did not see Woo Woo, who he would acknowledge was standing on the 2nd floor, do nothing at all. Upon further questioning, Pernell would state that on the night in question, he didn't lie to the NOPD. He just hadn't told them the whole story, all while testifying that he was not in agreement with Flair's decision of wanting to go with the move on Chocolate. Pernell would also deny admitting to pulling the trigger on Flair aggressively responding, why would he crush his own son? Ultimately acknowledging that he did see Woo Woo in the parish, but only through a window. Pernell would also deny conspiring with Woo Woo to put the crushing charges on T. Darrow. Officer Leary, the firearms expert, would testify that the 7.62 by 39mm casings recovered from the scene, 9 from the ground in the walkway by the stairs, and 6 from near the steps had all been fired from the same chopper, further testifying that the 7.6 by 39mm bullet and fragment found at the scene, as well as a bullet fragment recovered from Chocolate's autopsy, were all fired from the same gun. Officer Leary would also testify that he ran ballistics on all of the cartridge casings, the bullet, and the bullet fragments to the Norinco chopper that was submitted to him for examination. In an unexpected turn of events, Leary would also match another bullet fragment and casing found at the scene from that same gun. Officer Leary was stating that every spent cartridge, casing, bullet, and bullet fragment he examined was fired by the Norinco, going on to testify that none of the specimens matched the other chopper seized by the NOPD. Leary would also run ballistics on the 45 casing and determine them to come from the same 45, along with a 9mm casing with no matching weapon attached. The forensic pathology expert would testify that he performed the autopsy of both victims. Chocolate had been hit up more than 30 times. Chocolate's wounds would reflect that he was hit up from different angles. The autopsy showed that Chocolate was hit up at least 20 more times while in a stationary position. Entry points were conclusive to there being only one shooter. Tidiaro will go on to be charged with and tried for 2 counts of second-degree crushing, but was convicted of only 1 count of manslaughter. The sentence for the manslaughter under the circumstances of the instant case was imprisonment at hard labor for not more than 40 years. Tidiaro will be adjudicated of being a second felony habitual offender. The federal government would devise a policy plan to develop the first all-black, low-income housing structure in New Orleans. This plan will come to life in 1941 and be known as the C.J. Pete Housing Project. In 1955, the project was expanded, incorporating 6 more city blocks, creating what was to be known as the Old Side, New Side. 2001 brought on the start of demolishing the C.J. Pete projects. This structure would birth some of the most notorious gangsters in New Orleans history.
Street famous.
The Melpomene projects, officially called the Gustavo Apartments or the Gus Homes, is a housing complex located in the Central City neighborhood of New Orleans. The Melf, constructed in 1964, occupies 10 city blocks, bounded by South Robinson, Clio, Simon Boulevard, and Martin Luther King. There would be 4 3-story buildings and 2 4-story buildings for families and a high-rise for the elderly. Being 12 stories tall, the Gus high-rise is the tallest public housing complex in the city. The Melf, once made up of single multi-family homes, by the 1950s, the city declared the Melf as the slums, which paved the way for the build of the projects. The Melf will be the youngest surviving housing projects in New Orleans. The high-rise will undergo major renovations in 2002. In the 1980s and the 1990s, the Melf was well known for that work, as it was once run over by steppers and hustlers. In 2004, 3 of 6 low-rise buildings will be demolished after failing to meet the Housing Authority of New Orleans economic guidelines. In 2006, the Melf will be one of the only projects in the city that survived Hurricane Katrina with minimal wind damage and no flooding. The last building will be demolished in 2013. Reconstruction will begin in the same year at a cost of $61 million through the use of $26 million from HANO, $21.3 million from FEMA, and $13.1 million in low-income housing credits. Gibbs Construction and Clomax Construction will complete the development of the new 1, 2, 3, and 4 bedroom units, which include Energy Star appliances, which would also be pre-wired for cable and internet services. The new Gus Homes would open in 2018 with 638 homes located on the entire Gus site, 577 of which are public housing units. October 17, 2022. Terrence Gangster Williams will take to his platform to run an ep. That ep will be about Skip, a.k.a. Ripper, out the Melf, and his brother Cleve, a.k.a. Sick With It. Driving through the hood in the Lex Bubble, Terrence will spot an unfamiliar vehicle in his rear view mirror. That vehicle would be a pickup truck. Driving that truck would be Skip, of the Melf. Skip will blow the horn to get Terrence's attention. Gangster's version will go like this. Skip will get his attention by blowing the horn and introduce himself as the one who deleted Sterling. As this conversation was happening, Gangster would notice dudes off the set walking up with them yappers. Gangster would make eye contact and shake his head no. The dudes would stand down. Skip's recollection of the day in question would go like this. While riding in the Magnolia looking for Gangster, Skip will be informed that Terrence was on PNC. Sliding through PNC, Skip will run into Gangster, who would be in the car in front of him. Gangster will make the block and alert the dudes off PNC that Skip was trailing him. Gangster and Skip would make the block again, as Skip gestured for Terrence to pull over. Gangster, who was stopped in the middle of the block, would turn his car catty corner. Skip would spot the dudes from PNC walking up with the strap and up the yapper on Terrence, telling him, "Make them dudes stand down." Words would be passed. The men would agree to meet. Gangster, who would feel like the French Quarters was too close to the Ville, would agree to meet at Piccadilly's in Carrollton. This meeting would never take place, as Gangster would not show. Skip will go on to say that the NOPD 2nd District showed up instead, swarming the parking lot. Feeling pinned down, Skip would holler at Cleve to scoop him up. Needless to say, the two would never meet. Let's fast forward. The beef is on. Terrence Gangster Williams, who wants his gift back, would attend a UNLV concert being held at the Riverboat Hallelujah. Terrence, young, arrogant, and cocky at the time, would go to Big Whalen, uncle of Magnolia Levy's t-shirt shop in the 17th. Gangster would get a t-shirt made that read, "I get low down and dirty with the 30-30, a verse from the rap group UNLV. The t-shirts would also have tombstones on it with Skip and Cleve's name on them. 2 choppers would be busting at the graves on the shirt. It is this t-shirt that Gangster will rock to the UNLV concert. Skip, who would be in the hospital, was unable to witness the shirt with his own eyes. Let's rewind. Erattle Street in the Melf is where Skip resides. This particular night, Skip would not be in the Melf. Skip would be 2 blocks away on the set. If my memory serves me correctly, he would be down the street from the club, 49. As Skip was counting his bread from hustling that night, an unfamiliar truck would creep up the block. This would get Skip's attention because of the loud pipes on the truck. Unsure of who this could be, Skip will pull out the tool. The truck will creep by Skip slowly and make the block. Walking to the corner, Skip would notice the NOPD driving up the block. Not wanting to get caught with the blicky, Skip would stash his gat on top of a car tire. Skip, who would watch the cop car make a left and drive off, would turn back around to notice the truck heading his way. Someone down the street would holler Skip's name, grabbing his attention. Before he knew it, that truck had crept down on him. 4 men would rise from the bed of the truck and start letting off. Skip would get hit up 3 times and fall to the ground. While on the ground, Skip would notice the 2 men hop off the truck, firing and heading his way. Being from the streets, Skip would know that the 2 who hopped out were coming to dog him. Skip himself would start firing. As he was firing, he would hear the car tire that would make a loud exploding noise. The men that were firing would retreat. Skip would assume that it was the loud noise that bagged them down. Let's fast forward and recant Skip's side of what took place at the Riverboat Hallelujah. UNLV will be performing. The Melf will be in attendance. Cleve, Skip's brother, and his homies of the Melf will see Gangster rocking the Rest in Peace t-shirt. They will wait outside with some sticks for Terrence to exit the venue. Terrence, who was no fool as to what was going on, will be escorted to his whip by the NOPD. After exiting the venue, Terrence will hop in the Lex bubble and pull off, drawing up the middle finger to the dudes out the Melf. Sick with it, would hit Skip up on a motor flip and tell him what had just taken place. Furious, but still recovering from being hit up at the time, Skip would attempt to leave the hospital. Hospital staff and security will prevent him from doing so. Skip will later be visited in the hospital by Keith Hunter, Sick with it, Shorty, Redhead, and 2 other dudes out the Melf. They would slide that boy the yag. Sick with it would pay the security guard to man the door of Skip's room. After completing rehab, Skip will fully recover and be back on the street. The feud would intensify. Both sides will go back and forth. Until this day, Skip still can't believe that Gangster had the nuts to rock the Rest in Peace t-shirt. In Skip's own words, that was one hell of a statement. Each year, the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day celebration in New Orleans includes a stop on Aretha Castle Haley Boulevard, where a commemorative statue was erected in 1976. Artist Frank Hayden, a former student at Xavier University and professor at Southern University, designed the abstract sculpture to honor Dr. King as a symbol of brotherhood and reconciliation. Inside the sculpture are excerpts from Dr. King's speeches. In January of 1957, looking to scale their success with Montgomery buses all across the South, as well as to move toward the full desegregation of public facilities, 60 black ministers and leaders, including Dr. King, would meet in Atlanta under the not short but quiet descriptive name Southern Leadership Conference on Transportation and Nonviolent Integration. On Valentine's Day in 1957, Dr. King and 96 other black religious leaders of 35 communities from 10 states would meet in Central City. They would meet inside the New Zion Baptist Church on 3rd and LaSalle Streets. Their mission was to end segregation. During segregation in New Orleans, it was illegal for black and white patrons to dine in the same restaurant. But one still famous Treme restaurant, Dickie Chase, with a well-hidden staircase leading up to an inconspicuous second floor dining area, made it possible for leaders of the civil rights movement, regardless of race, to meet, eat, and plan together. In 1981, a second monument to Dr. King will be installed on the neutral ground of Claiborne Avenue as a memorial to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The life-size brown bust sits atop a granite pedestal. In April of 2019, local redevelopment officials, art experts, and business owners on Aretha Castle Haley Boulevard will celebrate the rededication of the neutral ground that will celebrate Dr. King. The newly refreshed neutral ground on Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard between Aretha Castle Haley and South Rampart Street now features a walking path, benches, and landscaping, replacing the worn sidewalk and raggedy grassy patches that formerly surrounded it. The $333,000 improvement on the neutral ground will be funded through the state's Office of Community Development and overseen by the New Orleans Redevelopment Authority.
You are now about to witness the strength of street knowledge. For the New Jack City.
It's shortly before 11 p.m. on a Sunday in the 1900 block of North Claiborne Avenue in the 7th Ward. A 35-year-old male is lying lifeless in the street. The man had been hit up. Along with the 35-year-old male would be a 37-year-old female who had been hit up as well. The woman who was hit in the abdomen will be transported to the hospital where she will be taken into surgery. This is the story of Pernell Allen, a.k.a. Face. Born to Esther Allen at McNelton Cooper in 1977, Pernell Allen would come up in uptown New Orleans, the Melpomene Project. Pernell Allen will be one of a handful of brothers: Lamondo, Pernell A., Lester, Pernell T., Edgar, Dante, Rishi, and Will. Pernell would also have several sisters. Those sisters would be Chanel, Nikisha, Gwendolyn, Jessica, Katina, and Brandy. The Allen family will be large and garnered respect from the entire city, not just the Melf. Coming up in the grimy streets of the NO, the Allen boys were known for being about that life. The year is 1985. An incident would take place that would change Pernell's life forever. There will be many stories as to what actually transpired the summer of '85 that will forever impact Pernell's life as he would know it. One of those stories would be that an enraged woman would attempt to get back at her boyfriend by tossing a Molotov cocktail into her boyfriend's apartment window. She would ultimately hit the wrong window, igniting the flames that started the fire that would ultimately end up setting Pernell ablaze. Molotov cocktails are a hand-tossed weapon that consists of a glass bottle filled with a flammable liquid and a fuse when lit and thrown, shattering upon impact, igniting the flammable substance contained, spreading flames as the fuel burns. Another story being heard throughout the city is that it was never a woman. It, in fact, was a man. It is rumored that Pernell's mom would have an insecure and jealous boyfriend. Pernell's mom would part ways with dude, sending him into a jealous rage, triggering him to throw a grenade or Molotov cocktail into the window of her apartment. This would set the kitchen ablaze, causing a gas stove to blow, sending flames throughout the entire 3-bedroom apartment. Pernell would narrowly survive the incident with severe burns over his entire body, initially earning him the nickname Nubby due to damage done to his hands from the fire. Burn masks are one of the most effective treatments that can be used to manage swelling and scarring from facial burns and skin grafts. These masks are made from the same tight elastic fabric as compression garments. Burn masks work by ensuring that the mask is compressing the burned skin as effectively as possible, making for a more successful and speedy recovery. It is this type of mask that Pernell would wear until his burns were healed enough to no longer need it. The mask had nothing to do with Pernell being uncomfortable and afraid to show his face, as other videos on the platform have falsely stated. After doctors will remove the mask, Pernell will now go by what he would be infamously known as today, Face. Face, who was strong-willed, would stand on what he believed in, defining right from wrong based on what he felt and not that of what others would like him to believe. Contrary to popular belief, Face was a ladies' man. Face would have dealings with some of the baddest broads in the city. No stranger to the streets, Face was about that life. Although his fingers had been burned down to the nubs, Face was still squeezed. It is rumored that Face would use popsicle stick and string to pull the trigger, making him a force to be reckoned with in the streets. Not only about that trigger play, Face wouldn't back down from throwing them hands and would be quick to scuffle. Face would build a reputation for being a known stepper. The whole city knew that Face wasn't to be played with. Face would ultimately end up losing his life to the streets on September 30th of 2012. This was the story of Pernell Allen, aka Face, out the mouth.
Street famous.
The time is 10:30 p.m. The date, February 8th, 2004. The location is 2339 Martin Luther King Boulevard in New Orleans, Louisiana. Detectives will find one body at the bottom of a stairway leading down to the courtyard of the Melpomene project. Another body will be found on the stairway leading to the second floor. The stairways and landings were on the outside of the building. The crushing appeared to have occurred in the courtyard or on the first floor. One man appeared to have been hit up downstairs and climbed the stairs to the second floor before collapsing. Detectives will interview an alleged witness. The alleged witness would tell detectives that earlier that day he had received a call from his son asking him for a ride from 2339 Martin Luther King Boulevard. Upon arriving at the location, the alleged witness will go to look for his son, where he knew he hung out. Once making it to the second floor landing, he would observe his son, who had been hit up, laying on the ground. He would then call the NOPD. This is the story of Lamondo Allen, brother of Face.